Recording now, and we'll start the webinar. We'll give it just a minute or two to give folks time to log in. All right. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jessica from Greenlight and we are excited to host tonight's launch event for issue 6 of Voices of Lefferts. We have a full lineup of local contributors joining us tonight and they'll be moderated by Voices of Lefferts editor and director Deborah Mutnick, so you are in for an excellent evening tonight. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Deborah and to all of tonight's featured contributors for being here and to all of you in the audience for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces right now, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. A couple housekeeping things before we start. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see and hear you. They can see that you're here though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees on the top of your Zoom screen. There are a couple different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like a speech balloon. You can type comments there, encouragement from the authors. You can let them know where you're logging in from, anything you like there in the chat. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author or by any of the authors, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find that by clicking on the icon that looks like 2 speech balloons. We'll be taking questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. We are recording tonight's event, so look for audio or video versions on our social media channels later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Voices of Lefferts, issue 6, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore in Flatbush. You can shop in person at our Flatbush Avenue store, 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day of the week. We just got in our copies today, fresh off the presses. And you can also purchase all the issues of Voices of Lefferts and many others in that store location. Or you can order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat in just a moment. If you care about supporting both this great community project and your local independent bookstore, buying this featured book is a great way to do that. All right, I'll introduce our MC for the evening. Deborah Mutnick is a professor of English at LIU Brooklyn, co-editor of Reflections, the Journal of Civic Engagement, Public Rhetoric, and Service Learning, and a member of the advisory board of the Coalition for Community Writing. She also sits on the board of directors of the Prospect Lefferts Gardens Neighborhood Association and has lived in the neighborhood since 1996. I just want to note, since the first issue came out, Greenlight has sold over 1,000 copies of the Voices of Lefferts collection. We are so honored to be able to offer space for this tremendous community writing project, and we're grateful to all of you for supporting the project and the bookstore with your presence tonight. Deborah's going to talk more about the Voices of Lefferts project and introduce tonight's readers, so please join me in welcoming Deborah Mutnick. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and welcome to our 6th author reading for Voices of Lefferts. The workshop in which tonight's authors composed their pieces started a little over a year ago in February 2020. We held 2 sessions at our usual meeting place, Grace Reformed Church, and then switched to virtual meetings in mid-March, along with the rest of the city and much of the world. So one of the themes that echoes through this reading is life in the time of coronavirus, but also voiced tonight are ongoing concerns about gentrification and displacement and racial injustice that go back to the project's inception. A few notes on issue 6, which, as Jessica said, is now on sale at Greenlight, that you won't hear in the reading. We dedicate the issue to Bob Thomason, a founder of the Prospect Lefferts Gardens Neighborhood Association and much beloved community member, who died on November 10th at age 92. We're delighted in this issue to feature a local artwork again, this time paintings by Noel Heffelay, who many of you are familiar with. And once again, we include excerpts from 3 oral histories. Thanks go to our graphic designer, Frank Marchese, photographers Nancy Truber and Michael Abraham, oral history director and editor, Laura Thorne, editors Brenda Edwards, Ron Drenger, Andrea Phillips Merriman, Liz Oliver, and copy editors Ron Drenger and Rena Klege. Thanks also to Humanities New York, the Brooklyn Arts Council, Citizens Committee New York City, and Long Island University for their generous support, as well as thanks to PLG Arts, Park Slope Copy Center, and especially to our host, Jessica, and Greenlight Bookstore for all the support you give to us and other community groups. Finally, before I introduce the readers, stay tuned for announcements about a series of public events and activities to be offered as part of our newest initiative called Flatbush Eats Food Survival Celebration, which we're really excited about. So I'm going to list tonight's authors in the order in which they will read. And then each of them will briefly introduce themselves again and pass it along to the next reader. The readings always spark questions and comments. So as Jessica said, please write your questions in the Q&A. And we look forward to the dialogue, which is always a very important part of these readings. So the readers are, in this order, Mikela Ragin, Ashar Foley, Judy Spence, Meg Stentz, Kristofer Lyons, Rachel Hayes, and Anna Malagon. And welcome our first reader, Mikela, take it away.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. Okay, can you hear me? Can you see me? Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna time myself too. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Mikela Ragin. I'm reading excerpts from my essay or my piece in issue 6, and it's entitled Whichever Day It Is. Okay, so February 15th. I believe that I am a storyteller, not the type that fibs or lies, one that a grandmother might scold, or the type that fabricates to seem more exciting. Rather, the type that's fluid with words. Imagination running wild with thoughts, ideas, and characters. Actually, I am a storyteller. I have stories to tell and things to share, just unsure of a starting point. Nothing worth it comes easy. All I need to do is get it done. We sit together in anticipation. Our story begins during a global rift, a shift of realities, a crescendo of varied vibrations heard across the world. A new season begins. April 24th. Numbers are abstractions, but they represent human beings, so take these numbers personally. That's a quote from Mayor Bill de Blasio, by the way. Gathering and filling rooms from the safety of our homes. No longer decked out in our most respectable obsidian attire. Sunglasses and wide brims replaced with muted mics and block screens. Those we watch are muffled by masks, surrounded by phones, so we can all tune in. A hollow feeling, the loneliness that comes with grief, sharpened by computer screens. We remember our people, those we've loved and those who've loved us. Energy never dies, but continues to move around us. So why does this feel so far away? So isolated and cold? 100 plus people are present and tuned in. Connections glitch, sound drags, but we're still here. Scriptures and memories shared, per usual. No hugs, no hands to squeeze. Whether it's 6 feet or miles away, we embrace from afar with you in mind. I can only hope that you are at peace. Physically alone, but surrounded with love in your heart. Your legacy will continue, as your spirit is the link that will keep us all connected. To everyone lost who was more than an abstraction, to everyone who takes these numbers personally, you're not alone. We're even more connected than we can see. We continue our journey outside and within. Anxiety and uncertainty. Why them? Why me? Why now? What next? What will we find when the ash settles? May 24th. We're out of ketchup. Like no ketchup or barbecue sauce. We both really enjoy sauces, flavors, and tastes. And we like potatoes. I'm wrapping up because why don't we just go and buy some ketchup? Squeezing tight to those little red to-go packets. And for what? May 28th. I love you so much. Committing to things and conquering them within you. Small wins always rock. Bigger victories, that much better. But I know you know what I mean. And if you don't, one day you will. When we win, I win. Teeny tiny concerts within as we celebrate one another. no less than 6 feet apart. And after the confetti falls, let's do it all again. When will help be on the way? We do the inner work to lighten the load. But as we get closer, the pre-existing resurfaces. A thicker scab has shown itself, revealing the secrets and the truths and the motives of those deemed responsible for the people. Okay, thank you so much, you guys. I'm going to pass it along to Ashar Foley. And yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Mikela. Chat was blowing up for you. My name's Ashar Foley, and I'm reading from The Death and Life of a Neighborhood Cooperative. And I want to say a shout out to Cheryl Seeley, whom I interviewed for this essay, but it's in the later part of the essay, so you'll have to get the journal and read that. And just thank you to Cheryl. Señorita, ¿tienes guantes? A man in a winter sports jacket asked me through the chain link fence that surrounds Kew Gardens, a small triangular community garden at Church Avenue and East 18th Street. Guantes, he repeated. Seeing that I didn't understand, he rubbed his hands together to show me what he meant. Jabón? Asked the woman who had just come in on her bike. I think he wants soap, she said to me. I dug through my bag for the little bottle of hand sanitizer that I had learned from the other New Yorkers pre-pandemic to always carry and held it up. Jabón? I said. He wants gloves, guantes, said another woman who was working that day in the garden. She ran off into a shed at the far corner of the lot. Señor, I said. He had turned his back to the fence. Señor, ella tiene. I pointed to the woman running to the shed as he turned back around to face me. He thanked me and turned back to face the street with the other men who hung out on that block on Saturday mornings. I wondered if he had been there last week and the week before, if I had seen him without recognizing him each time I brought the week's scraps to the garden. Sometimes I just hate this place. I was brought back from my thoughts by the woman with the bike, now chopping at her compost with a spade. She continued in a hushed voice. Every time I come here, I see only white people. I was interested in hearing more on this point, but I didn't know what to say myself. As far as I could tell, she was white, I was white, and so were the two other women working in the garden that day. But on other days, it wasn't only white women and men working in the garden or coming to chop compost. It makes me so mad, she said, before backing her bike out of the garden and into the street. I felt relieved as well as irritated to see her go. She didn't seem to want to have a conversation about the persistent and complex problem of de facto segregation, nor could I tell what, if anything, I should do about it in that moment. The problem of de facto all-white spaces was not news to me. I had spent a lot of time with it in the last year when I learned that community integration is deliberate and ongoing work. Like democracy, it is more verb than noun. I learned this for myself as a worker member owner of the Lefferts Community Food Co-op, which was located at 324 Empire Boulevard between Rogers and Bedford. As I write this essay, the store's gate, beautifully painted by India Lofaso, is still there. During my 5 years of membership, the co-op helped me to find a source of neighborhood community, not only during my monthly shifts and weekly shopping trips, but also just walking along Rogers Boulevard and Flatbush Avenue. But while my sense of community and place was expanding, the co-op was standing still. Our active membership remained at around 100 people. Most members were more or less like me, young, white, and as I thought at the time, transient, with little ability to invest in the co-op for the long term. Furthermore, the majority of our membership did not reflect where the co-op was situated, in the heart of the largest Caribbean diasporic community in the world. At co-op strategy meetings, we, a mostly white we, discussed how the co-op could better attract those who had for decades called the neighborhood home. Presumably, this community was made up of many people who once and most probably still had a connection to land and who could discern the difference between fresh food and the food one expects to find in a conventional grocery store. In short, a co-op couldn't have wished for a better potential membership base. As we began talking to residents, I learned that the co-op had deeper cultural problems. Whereas I had assumed our lack of success in attracting Caribbean members was due to our mission to offer mostly locally sourced goods and not the Caribbean fare that you could get at the local markets. Multiple women told me that Sunday was a day for worship. If you want people to come in, they said open on Saturdays instead of Sundays. Another big cultural problem we faced was in community perception. While co-op committee organizers may not have known how to sell the co-op to longtime PLG residents, real estate agents certainly knew how to sell the co-op to newcomers. We found out that real estate companies were including the co-op in their lists of neighborhood amenities, used to entice renters and buyers to the new luxury apartments going up on every block, thus exacerbating the harmful and false association of organic food and food cooperatives to gentrification and whites-only culture. Unfortunately, the real estate narrative may have won out. One day during my shift at the co-op, I heard two passersby say to each other in reference to our storefront, "Co-op, that's gentrification." It didn't matter that our store consisted of a few produce fridges and buckets of beans. If part of that community perceived us to be gentrifiers, and if our presence was actively being used to promote the processes of gentrification, then we were in fact gentrifiers. Despite our efforts, our membership numbers didn't change, and members voted to close our doors in May of 2019. Faced with closure, it was easy to pin our failures on our organizational and financial problems rather than on our community problems. So when one of our board members, Michael Lowe, proposed bringing in the Cooperative Economics Alliance of New York, or CENIC, to lead us in a 2-day anti-racism training, I was perplexed. Is racism really our problem, I thought? Aren't membership numbers and money our problem? The CENIC training showed me how these two sets of problems are interconnected and not just for our co-op. And with that, I pass it to Judy Spence.
Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Spence. I'm a long-term resident of East Flatbush, and I'd like to share brief excerpts from my essay in which I describe how real estate overdevelopment in our community has impacted our lives and has served as a cause of action to bring the community together for a common cause. My essay is entitled, Save Lenox Road. My husband, Gerald Spence, and I have lived on Lenox Road between New York and Nostrand Avenues for the past 47 years. We were young, first-time homebuyers who moved to East Flatbush in 1973 during a period of neighborhood transition. It is ironic that now, during our senior years, our neighborhood is in the midst of another transition. Quality of life issues and possible displacement are realities faced by many residents like ourselves due to problems caused by the surge in local real estate development. For the past 7 years, at any given time, there have been at least 2 active construction sites operating simultaneously on our block. That's on our side of the street alone. Recent articles about Lenox Road have appeared in major newspapers. One New York Times headline reads, "Pack your own hard hat." And an article that appeared in the Brooklyner is titled, "Another freestanding home on Lenox Road in East Flatbush will face wrecking ball." Some have called it ground zero. I recall how the community first came together in 2008 in response to an early red flag. Word got out that 2 one-family homes were to be demolished and replaced with a state-funded 57-unit supportive housing facility, and panic set in among community residents. We were desperate to find some way to stop the clock on the time bomb that was set to destroy our neighborhood. There existed an imminent threat, and the initiative that began with a handful of concerned residents quickly grew in momentum. We presented statistical data clearly showing that our neighborhood was being unfairly targeted. There were stark disparities, an overclustering and oversaturation of shelters and supportive housing facilities in East Flatbush as compared to neighborhoods with different racial and socioeconomic demographics. Our collective voices were heard that time around by the decision makers, and the proposal to build a supportive housing facility on our block was halted. Nevertheless, real estate brokers kept calling. They kept coming around. They kept emailing, texting, ringing our doorbells at all times of the day or night, offering cold, hard cash to buy our homes. So even back then, we realized that we had won a battle, but not the war. There was this ongoing threat, eating away at the very heart of our community that could only be addressed through organized collective action on the part of stakeholders. But we had to face the fact that civic engagement in our community can be described as reactive rather than proactive. We recognized a need to increase ongoing community involvement, but we also sensed gaps in the priorities of various groups within the community. So we set out to try to bridge some of those gaps. On that note, the Lenox Road Block Association Alliance was formed, and one of our first projects was to survey individual residents to learn about their concerns, to find out what changes they wanted to see in the community, what would motivate them to take action. We discovered that back in 2009, safety, sanitation, and services for youth, or lack of services for youth, rather than real estate development, were the main concerns of the day. But by 2013, our community was being physically ravaged by new construction. Our quality of life was being eroded on a daily basis. We were living with steadily increasing levels of noise pollution, air pollution, blocked sidewalks and streets, and lax safety measures that resulted in incidents of injury to people and damage to property. In addition, there was and is a movement to replace rent stabilized units with market rate. And the cost of rent has skyrocketed. We also witnessed unscrupulous tactics used to push tenants out. So as time passed, it became easier for all community residents, owners and renters alike, to see that we were all in this together. This was indeed our fight. We were thirsty for information. We wanted to learn how the system worked. And we began to take a closer look at government institutions to learn how they were structured and what role they played in deciding the fate of neighborhoods such as ours. We also began to look more closely at our local elected officials, our legislators, and we learned a great deal about how they were either representing our best interests or were not doing so. And I go into more detail about that in the essay. But I'd like to close by saying that this has indeed been an eye-opening experience. Today, I get increased satisfaction from hearing success stories, big and small, because I now have a greater understanding and appreciation for the uphill battle to victory. East Flatbush got its first landmark block recently. That means that their community is protected from out of context development. I'm aware of how the residents of East 25th Street fought long and hard to reach this milestone, and how their community spirit grew stronger through their collective efforts. This is a success story. One thing I've learned from this experience is that it takes an entire village coming together to save a community. If others can learn or be motivated from our experiences here on Lenox Road, then I say we should celebrate that. Thank you, and I'll pass it on now to the next reader, Meg Stentz. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy. My name is Meg Stentz, and I'm reading from the middle of my piece, Building a Life in Flatbush. For context, at the start of the piece, my partner and I were dating long distance. He lived in Chicago and I lived in Harlem. And when he decided to move to New York, we settled on living together for the first time right here at the corner of Parkside and Flatbush. Because we had never lived together, the story of what our lives would be like together unfolded up and down Flatbush Avenue from Parkside to Lincoln, one weekend at a time. Each Saturday, we like to walk to the library, passing through the farmers market at Grand Army Plaza. This year, we noticed the composting. Because it was already in our routine to walk past there, we started to compost. We became the sort of people who compost because we're already the sort of people who walk in the park. The park shaped us in ways more subtle and more important too. On Sunday afternoons, there are drum circles where folks gather on stumps and chairs with drums of all sizes. Men and women drum, and sometimes there is dancing and the diaspora is on display. In moments like these, I feel myself as the gentrifier. I am aware of the weight of my watching, my skin the color of the colonizers, and so I am conflicted. I do not want to intrude, don't want my neighbors to feel othered because I am watching their new to me customs. This beautiful ritual wasn't created for the pleasure of the white spectators, and yet it brings me great pleasure. The spirit of the neighborhood is so generous that I do feel welcome to sit as a visitor nearby. Other spectators nod, smile, tacitly welcome me into this space. I accept the silent invitation to watch and to tap a foot, to admire and to share in the humanity. I am a sap who gets misty at parades and large sporting events, and at most any showing of community solidarity, at the power of people together. And so for Matt and I to witness this cross-cultural music making together was affecting. It affirmed something between Matt and me. We'd moved to Flatbush-PLG because we wanted to live somewhere diverse, near the park and near the train. Moving here, though, has meant that we're changing the demographics of the neighborhood. Noticing and taking account of our own whiteness is something we've had to do together as a couple. For me, this is part of my work. I am an advocate for educational justice and have training in the ways that race impacts many aspects of our life. For Matt, this understanding is newer, and yet we cannot live a life together here that is race blind. A life in PLG means a life of reading about race, racism, and whiteness, about redlining, segregation, and institutional white supremacy. It means that as Matt and I grow in our partnership, we are growing as neighbors too. We are learning to commit to each other and to this place. We are less casual about each by the day. When we go to the laundromat or the coffee shop or to dinner, we are aware that we are building a life. We ask for people's names. We introduce ourselves to our neighbors. We notice when the community fridge or the little free library is empty and accept the invitation to participate in this community giving and receiving. We understand ourselves to be part of this mutual exchange. This is what it means to be a neighbor here, and it's all we've known of living life together. When we talk about the future we want, we talk about the growth that comes from living in community. When we live in diversity, we get to know our neighbors and ourselves. We learn more about living in relationship to others, and we push ourselves to be more open to the people around us. We are better partners for living here, and we are better neighbors for learning to be better partners. Thanks. And with that, I will pass to Kristofer.
Thank you, Meg. My name is Kristofer Lyons, and the title of my piece is called Within Your Perception. You may refer to me as Nefeb. This is my story of triumph over my lack of perspective. My parents migrated to Flatbush, New York from the UK when I was a young boy, 12 years old. My mother was originally from Senegal and my father from Haiti. Within my family, there's plenty of rich history and tradition. From our usual traditional feast on Senegalese Independence Celebration Day, April 4th, to our legendary Haitian New Year's bashment, January 1st. We celebrate with neighbors and friends from all over. Just as a disclaimer, I'd like to make you aware that since I was a kid until now, being in my late 20s, at times I find myself caught in this public dreamlike ongoing discussion that takes place between myself and others. If you're wondering, the answer is no. I do not have an imaginary friend. Beware, coping mechanisms may take form in many unique ways. As I walk the streets of PLG, I am offered a spectacular view. Each tree-lined brownstone block has an intricate polka dot spider web design. If you're not familiar, it's very easy to get lost. Homes here seem to only be unique in one or two ways. The color of your stoop, usually dark rusty iron brown, or the color of your front door, commonly infused with elegant clear glass. No two houses are exactly the same, yet almost all of them are all connected at the foot and shoulder. By giving you a peek inside my mind, I plan to make you ultimately aware of how an outsider sees this well-trimmed landscape known as Prospect Lefferts Garden. I am here to represent the voice of reason. I'm going to tell it to you straight. It's okay if you don't agree with me. I plan to show you how we are all remarkably similar in experiences. Despite the normal worldly perspective of Brooklyn, I have noticed that there's a deep earthly human connection within the concrete jungle. Watch the natives, minding your business as an art form. Pay attention to the signs. You must be able to interpret Brooklyn fast talk. The welcoming arms of the neighboring community are there for a joyful embrace. I see the vibrant people from all walks of life. The avenues, sometimes brimming with children and pedestrians, often provide a spectacle. The corners, the parks, the street light, the street life. This is the vision. The many wonders of a nomad's eye. Those who know me would say, Nefeb, it sounds like you're caught within a fantasy of a make-believe adventurer. In the most respectful manner, I would nod a gesture in agreement with them. Within these Flatbush blocks, I found a deep hidden message. With such depth comes a very unavoidable yet surreal opportunity for reflection. This is the core foundation and structure of most American cities and other countries. None quite like this, I may say. Stand and stare if you dare. We're all in pain, yet we're told to ignore. Push those thoughts away, stay positive. It seems as if that's the quick remedy for most, if not all, humankind. We speak of pain to our doctor. He gives us a prescription. We speak of pain to our loved ones. We end up gossiping about mutual friends. We speak of pain in a spiritual setting. Our faith is questioned. Oh, and God forbid, we speak of pain in our finances. You are likely to be labeled dumb or lazy. When will the time come for society to deal with and heal from the painfully beautiful reality of life in New York? It's crowded and expensive, can't you see? From the seat on the bus to the seat on the train, you can easily see some are in pain and some are not. From my seat, Flatbush is and always will be the most neighborly part of Kings County. Nowhere to hide, it seems. Oh, unless you're one of those kind to routine frequent local cafes, bars, or taverns. Everyone else is outside. Captured within a trance-like view, as I stand and wait for the 2 train at Newkirk Ave, there are people everywhere who want to thrive, not just survive. I can see that an uprising began so long ago, yet still has a wafting scent. I feel the reason behind the sensation of pain that I've experienced and witnessed needs some spotlight. From neighborhood to borough, the reality of everyone and everything is on display. From economic status, physical health, to mental health, all there with typical blatant New York indiscretion. When suddenly a tall man with a surgical mask appears. Trailing behind him is a trash-filled wake of despair. I do not know him. Although his eyes are familiar, his gaze reminded me of the pain of grief. His face bloody, his eyes tiger blood red. I reached to ask him, was he okay? He responded, why do you ask? Is there something wrong with my face? It was as if the man had no clue he was bleeding. It was as if the man had no clue he was in pain. And I'm gonna pass it off to Rachel Ryan.
Thank you, Kristofer. Well done. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Hayes Ryan. It's an honor to be here tonight. And my piece is titled Invisible. I make my way through droplets, pathogens, gliding down your passageway with ease, embedding my tentacles into your most vital parts that supply life to your body. I'm relentless, persistent, and volatile, showing no mercy, no respect. I grab hold of the weak, the old, and the young, anyone and everyone I can take. They call me the invisible enemy. I'm quick and undetectable, laughing at science and mocking the very idea of hope. I inflict fear and torment. I've come with deliberate intent to contaminate and disrupt everything that has order. I stand chaotic and strong. You look for ways to eliminate me, but there is none you can find. You look for ways to cope with me, but there is no barrier or boundary to my mayhem. I shut down countries, taking humanity by the throat. Isolating mankind through virtual realities, making touching a taboo. Like a tsunami submerging a village with one intense blow, I'm wiping out half of the world's population through my power, leaving my permanent scars on the globe's history. But I'm not all bad. Look closer. Through my confusion, there is still good. Pay attention to those important parts of you, those parts that hold love and gratitude, humility and appreciation. I've left behind reasons to live in the present, reasons that magnify and shout the true meaning of life. It's an opportunity to begin again, to be united, to be stronger, and to uphold the legacy, to heal your lands and reconstruct your cities, to see and believe that all you have and all that was ever given to you is a gift. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I now pass it on to Anna Mulligan.
That was incredible, Rachel. It's amazing to hear everybody speak and read from their work. I've heard it before, and it's still amazing. So I'll be reading from my piece, which is about my experiences living on Lincoln Road. So, when I moved to New York City, I found someone looking for a roommate in Flatbush. She had a big, fluffy gray rabbit, made whimsical yet morbid paintings of ladies in spring landscapes looking out vacantly. Seemed nice. I liked this neighborhood. I found banana leaves at Western Beef, and plantain chips were everywhere. It brought me right back to my childhood, watching my grandmother, Mama Elsa, deep fry plantain fritos in the old wok and place the gleaming discs on paper towels while my sister and I squirmed hungrily. I saw a bakery that had something called currant rolls and decided to check it out one day. Moving my one backpack into the new room, I looked out through rusting iron bars at a willow whose green fingers swept over the beds of a community garden. But most of my time at first was spent in Midtown Manhattan, where I commuted for my job, biking back home on foggy nights over the Brooklyn Bridge, looking at the glittering skyscrapers around City Hall. As I got to know my neighborhood better, I joined the Lincoln Road Garden, which was in the middle of my block, bookended by two restaurants, a jerk chicken place that changed into a ramen restaurant, and then Culpepper's, a mainstay with the Barbados colors, blue and yellow. At this garden, I was always welcomed with a hug. We had barbecues and potlucks. One time, we went all out. I brought ginger beer and currant rolls from Allen's. People brought whitefish. There was watermelon, pizza, burgers. I was always given more after these barbecues than I had brought to begin with. So I would go home with the garden's harvest, callaloo, kale, peppers. This place was a refuge to me, and I loved the people there. I started to explore my neighborhood more through food, first with bagels, the prototypical New York egg, cheese, salt, pepper, ketchup at PLG Tavern, then the chana and potato with tamarind sauce at the Hot Pot, the Guinness Stout chocolate ice cream at Creme and Cocoa, And if I went down the block on Nostrand on weekends, I could get a freshly macheted coconut and slurp it clean by the time I walked home. I took champorado from Ish onto the train in the mornings and happily burned my tongue on the pudding thick, rich chocolate. As the next summer wore on, I grew frustrated with my overfull room. The war with the fruit flies and cockroaches started up in earnest, and I sweated angrily on August midnights, too sticky to sleep since the iron bars outside the window made putting an air conditioner in impossible. I pushed coats into corners and shoes under the bed. I brought home shelves, trying to make space somehow, but they were all the wrong size. Finally, it was winter, and I quit my job. I signed up for an EMT class, and twice a week went to Bensonhurst, walking past a field of graves to all-day classes. I bought Korean Uzbekistani dumplings and Georgian pizzas during my lunch break, and thought once that being an EMT was like being a chauffeur for death. I learned how to take blood pressure readings, tie a splint, use a bag valve mask. And I went on my 12-hour ambulance rotation at Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center and peered curiously from the back of a spaceship white ambulance bay, the tired and kind EMTs in the front. I fumbled with the glucose reader while the people who we came to help kindly encouraged me. I stood in the middle of the room and did not know what to do when the mother of a dead boy handed me his medications. And then it was COVID. I grew starter plants and took Qigong classes online in my bedroom. I read the long ago picked up sidewalk stoop books and piled up a column of finished ones to go on the sidewalk again. I stayed in my room and looked at the ceiling. Gazing out, I saw through the iron bars a keyhole. In 2.5 years, I'd never seen it. I looked at the fluff and newspaper nest between the window screen and the bars, where a squirrel, nicknamed Squire, made its home in the fall. The squirrel was not in its nest. I looked at this empty nest, at the empty Maple Street garden, and listened all the time to sirens. I turned on the radio and immediately switched it off. I organized all the latex gloves I had accumulated from my EMT class and put them into Ziploc bags. The EMT certification arrived in the mail. I got the emergency alert asking all healthcare workers to help. I stayed inside. Anxiously, I inquired about my neighbors, wanting to help somehow, but there was nothing to do. I took scarfed walks with my neighbor, who loves purple flowers. She stopped to delight in every magnolia, every hellebore, every daffodil. Spring that year on Lincoln Road was beautiful. Pass it to Deborah.
Thank you, Anna and Meg and Ashar and Mikela and Judy and Kristofer and Rachel. What a beautiful reading. And thank you everybody who's here. The conversation that went on in the chat was really moving to me. And hearing these essays and poems once again just makes this project so meaningful to me and to our community. I would encourage the attendees still to ask questions in the chat. The Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. You just click on it and open it up and you can ask a question. I wanted to start, we've got about 15 minutes. We're gonna end at 8:30 because we know people have other things to do at night. And we wanna end on a strong note, but I wanna start off by asking the readers if they have questions for each other. One of the things I was struck by in the chat was how you were quoting each other. You and also the attendees were quoting from the work. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the lines that were quoted and the questions that you have about those lines. Anybody want to start? Meg.
Yeah, I can just jump in and say that it feels extra sweet being together because our time together was interrupted. And so this became like a de facto space that was like a through line from right before all the craziness and then throughout. So I think that seeing the evolution of the essay feels like extra poignant when we haven't seen each other since we're in like really different emotional spaces. So it feels good to be together and be able to echo and support each other in that way.
Thank you, Meg. Anybody else want to comment on each other's pieces or ask a question to one another? Ashar.
I'll ask Chris, at what point, because as I remember in the early days, you had a lot of impressions. Am I remembering that correctly? You had a lot of impressions and you weren't sure how to hang them together. So can you talk about when that happened or how that happened? Because now it all is it's like a walking tour.
Yes, I mean, thank you for that question, because that really did take some time for me to actually take that journey and walk. And I did a lot of physical walking as well as our this tool. And I like maps. I really read maps, understand maps. So I use a lot of maps in reference to some of the visuals I use to give me a deeper understanding as to like how the layout of the blocks is put together. And I really just kept coming back to it each day. Even though I didn't really have a full direction, I just started to try to shape what it is that I want to say while actually describing what meant the most to me about the neighborhood and about my experience here. So yeah.
Thank you, Chris. I want to ask some of the questions that are in the Q&A. And there are two that are directed to all of you. So I'm going to ask those first. The first is from Brenda Edwards, who's one of our editor coaches for Voices of Lefferts and also the president of Plegna. Thank you, Brenda, for being here. And she asked, what connections can you make between your own story and the story or stories of other panelists?
I have a thought on that.
Okay.
Judy here.
Judy and then Mikela.
Yeah. As a long-term resident of the community, I was quite moved by listening to the other readings, and particularly Meg. Hi, Meg. as a newcomer to the community, I remember your words. You don't want to intrude, or something to that effect. We have preconceived sometimes notions, biases about groups of people, and long-term residents, some, not all, have preconceived ideas about gentrifiers and what they're all about and what they're thinking and how they do sometimes intrude and are not sensitive to the people who lived here for years. So it was a pleasure for me to hear Meg express her feelings about being a newcomer to the community. And I sensed a great deal of respect that she has for the community and the residents who have lived here for years. So I thank you, Meg, for offering your perspective to a long-time resident. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Mikela?
Thank you, Deborah. I would say that, like you mentioned, we started a little bit before the pandemic began, and we were virtual, and then we didn't talk often. And so at some point when we got back together, it almost felt like we were kind of living similar lives, just like in these little boxes, like we're in Zoom right now, almost like neighbors in a building. And just like, even when Anna mentioned how it was hot in her apartment, and then trying all the foods, and then Chris taking a walk, and then Meg seeing people playing drums, and then Rachel's perspective of the virus itself, it just was, we were kind of like communal together. And that felt like that in our writing. Although we were experiencing different things at the same time, we were still experiencing them, I guess, parallelly, if you wanted to say that. So, but yeah, shout out to everybody. You guys did so good. Okay, sorry.
Let me go on to another question, and this one is also to everybody. This is from Jean Barron, who has just started working with the project, also as a coach editor. And Jean asks, how did what you thought you were going to write change when you went through the process of being in the workshop and working with your editor and all the rest? Kristofer.
I definitely would like to say shout out to my editor, Andrea, and she truly was the glue. I guess I should have mentioned her earlier too, because she did one really help me glue what I have together now. And you know, I've always been a really free-spirited writer, very like expressive with words, and I really like poetry. And writing this essay, you know, I want to do more work and bigger work. And, you know, she helped me kind of realize what more work would need for me to do with so much creativity I have. So I guess that's one way I've grown. She kind of helped me direct the flame that I have. And yeah.
Anybody else want to comment on that? How your writing changed from the beginning of the workshop to the time that it's now in print and in the bookstore?
I'll go.
Rachel.
Yes, so when I first started the project, my goal was to be a better writer. And as I went through the process and being with my fellow writers, and Deborah, you being my coach, it helped me to develop internally, like pay more attention to what I'm thinking, how I elaborate myself. But I initially started to write an essay, and Deborah, you remember, about the bowling alley that was on Bedford Avenue. And that's when COVID came. And it impacted me in a way where I needed to change my piece. So it really helped me develop, it helped me see that I have a lot more ability than I think I do. So I thank all you guys for helping me birth that as I move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else want to talk about process? And then I'll go on to a couple of other questions. No, I don't see anybody leaping at the chance. So here's another question. This is from Soph Stentz, I assume connected to Meg Stentz. And Soph asks, how has living in New York during a global pandemic shaped your definition of community? How will it shape your writing when all this is over? And she says, remarkable job to all of the panelists. Mikela.
I think it's taught me a level of personal resilience that everyone has. I think the city is a very particular city. It's not for everybody. I've heard that before as well. People who've come here and left, or come here and visited and didn't like it. But there are a lot of people still here, you know, and still pushing to work through what we're dealing with and what we're going through. I know for Chris and I, we got to visit some family. And so when we were here, we went somewhere else and we were like, you guys aren't even doing the same things that we're doing. And it was just such a crazy thing to see, and not in a bad way, but just, you know, just different from what we were experiencing. And so I would label that as resilience within this community and within this group of people that choose to be here and grow here and live here and thrive here. And it feels good. It feels good because I know some days it's harder to be here than most. And some days it's hard to function here, especially because the city has done like a whole flip and switch on what it used to be. So that resilience is shown in how we've managed to transpire through all of this, as well as where we're going and where we'll get to. So.
Thank you, Mikela. Anybody else want to speak to doing this in the middle of a pandemic, and if it shaped your writing at all? I know it shaped Anna's piece, which you know, has that wonderful line that somebody quoted in the chat, and then it was COVID. And I think that was something that we all experienced. And I'll just say that one of the things that shaped the workshop itself was this reality that we started to meet virtually after having met twice in person. And we usually meet in Grace Reformed Church, which is a wonderful place to meet. And it was hard, I think, switching to virtual workshops, and everybody stuck it out. And these pieces are so beautifully written and reflective, I think, of the deep experience of, you know, we don't necessarily see the pandemic in what you wrote, but I think that that period of reflection and meditation that we all went through is evident in everybody's writing. I think maybe we have time for one more question. I'm going to ask this one. It's kind of a hard question to answer quickly, but maybe I think it's an interesting one perhaps to end with. So this is another question from one of Meg's relatives, I think, Meg Stentz, who says, living in one of the most economically segregated communities in the country, and he clarifies in a subsequent question that he lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So he's talking he's talking about conversations that he's had in Ann Arbor, not in Flatbush. But so we often have conversations, he says, about preserving the character of neighborhoods that seem to take a very sinister, parenthesis, racist undertone. I was hoping our readers could comment on the balance between preserving community without drifting into discriminatory, not in my backyard-ism, NIMBYism. I think our situation in Flatbush is a little different from that, but maybe some of you might want to address that. Judy?
Yeah, I did mention, I believe I mentioned either in the excerpts that I put together or in the original essay. I do think I mentioned my community feeling threatened, that we were losing some of the character of the community. And I was referring not so much to race, but to culture. You know, when we moved into this community, we were one of the first Black families to move in to the community, and then it was a neighborhood in transition. Things quickly changed, and I guess at this point, some people would call it a Caribbean community. So we were concerned about the culture, as I said before, the culture changing. You know, we look around and we see wonderful restaurants, Caribbean restaurants. We see, you know, the entertainment in the park, whether it's the African drums, et cetera, all an example of the rich culture. So when I say that we were anxious about losing that character, that's what I was referring to. It's not always about Black and white. It's not always about race. This was very much about culture and ethnicity. And that's what I was referring to in my piece.
Thank you, Judy. And I think we're out of time. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I want to thank the readers for their work that they did in this past year and for the readings that they gave tonight. And I want to thank again Jessica for hosting us, and I'll turn it back to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Deborah. It was such a treat to hear from all these readers. There were so many wonderful, all different kinds of pieces, all different tones and voices. It's always a thrill to see what comes out of this amazing project. I put the link in the chat once more. We have a permanent page on the Greenlight Bookstore website where you can find all of the Voices of Lefferts issues. It's greenlightbookstore.com/Voices of Lefferts, or you can stop in our store at 632 Flatbush and pick up the journal anytime. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all of the readers who are published in this issue, and thanks for spending time with us tonight. Have a good evening, and we'll see you in the neighborhood.
Bye.
Good night.